There is no way to win if you're waking up in the morning and trying to make food decisions all day long, because your willpower will get depleted, your emotions will get hijacked, and you will end up turning to food. The only way to succeed is to wire in your eating the way you wire in other habits.
It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Dr. Susan Peirce Thompson. She's an adjunct professor of brain and cognitive sciences at the University of Rochester. She's a multiple New York Times bestselling author of 4 titles, including the life-changing book, Bright Line Eating. It's a book that I discovered in 2017 when it absolutely became a core part of how I take care of my health and the way that I eat. I've wanted to bring her on my channel for years because I know so many of you struggle with food and weight and mental focus and physical energy. If this is you, you are definitely going to want to hear what Susan has to say. Susan, I discovered your book, Bright Line Eating, not too long after it came out. It was 2017. And I had seen on Nextdoor that some neighbors were going to get together, and somebody had posted a thing saying, I've been dieting my whole life. I've tried every diet out there. I'm desperate to find something that works. Does everybody want to get together and try this new fad thing? It wasn't Bright Line Eating. And like 30 of us came to her living room, and everybody was sitting around and sharing their story. And everybody had the same story of struggling with food, weight, obsession with food and weight, and up and down, and all the different clothes sizes. We all had the common experience. And somebody passed me a note when they heard my story, and they said, I found this book called Bright Line Eating. You should check it out. And so I went home, I bought the book, and I never went back to the group. And it became how I eat. And I love this way of eating. It's so brilliant and so sustainable. And as a person who has complex PTSD, it's not always easy for me to set a plan and stick to my intentions and not just sort of blow out over food. Food is one of my addictions. But I had never found anything that helped to calm all of that. And not only did it help me calm the food addiction, but it helped me to re-regulate my nervous system. And I now have the language and the understanding of what that is. So in the Crappy Childhood Fairy membership program, we have these peer-led calls, and they have a peer-led call where people use my techniques and follow Bright Line Eating and discuss it.
I love it.
We've had this little collaboration going in other people's hands this whole time. And they feel very strongly that it's so much about re-regulation.
Yeah. I love it, Anna. Thank you so much for the work you're doing in the world. And I have someone in my life now who has a lot of complex PTSD, and your work is so valuable. And thank you for sharing your origin story with me, how you found Bright Line Eating. That's great.
Can you tell my fans here, what is the essence of Bright Line Eating?
Yeah, so it's a way of eating that acknowledges that for some people, certain foods really have become addictive. And going back to them is it's like going back to an abuser. It's just not productive or helpful. And so what we do is we acknowledge that for some of us, a bright line is the healthy relationship with certain foods. A bright line is a clear, unambiguous boundary that you just don't cross. It's like when you block someone on social media, that's a bright line. Or like when you stop drinking and go into AA, that's a bright line for alcohol. When you quit smoking, that's a bright line for cigarettes, right? And our bright lines are for sugar and flour. So that's no sugar, no flour. For meals, meaning we only eat at mealtime. We don't ever snack in between meals. So that would mean that a baby carrot outside of mealtime that's not my food. It's not mealtime. I eat at mealtimes. I don't eat random food in between. And then the fourth bright line is for quantities, meaning we eat our quantity of food, but no more. We're not going back and back and back for seconds, thirds, fourths, etc. And for a lot of us, we use a digital food scale for that fourth bright line, and not to weigh and measure tiny quantities of food. The quantity of food is ample, and most people will not eat enough, especially not enough vegetables, if they're not weighing and measuring. So a lot of that weighing and measuring is to make sure you're eating enough at your meals to actually sustain your body to the next meal. So those are the 4 bright lines: sugar, flour, meals, and quantities. And then the rest of the program is really about habits and about support. It's about learning how to keep your promises to yourself with food, learning how to plan your food in advance so you're not relying on willpower the next day. There's a lot of psychology, a lot of neuroscience built into it, a lot of good old homespun, practical, positive psychology type stuff built into it. Before, like right as I was leading up to doing Bright Line Eating online, I was teaching college courses in positive psychology and in the psychology of eating. And a lot of what I was teaching in those courses got woven into the Bright Line Eating framework.
What happened to your life through the food addiction that brought you to the point that you had to find another way?
Well, I really firmly believe that my food addiction started with drug addiction. Well, I don't know. Actually, I probably had the food addiction before the drug addiction. But it was not fully developed. It was not full blown. Like I, as a kid, was super fixated on food. And I did have a grown up waggle her finger in my nose and say, "You be careful, little missy. You're a sugar addict." When I was 5, I was told that. Like I was already enduring painful trips into town in Colorado in the summer heat to feed stores and post office runs and just intolerable stuff because I knew I'd get a candy bar, at some point along the way. So I did have a sugar addiction and I did have a food addiction, but it wasn't until I found drug addiction and used drugs to keep my weight down, used drugs to party and have fun, used drugs to have sexual experiences and explore the world and be free and break out. And then the drugs took on a life of their own and I developed addiction, drug-induced psychosis, dropped out of high school, went to some pretty dark places with the drugs, crystal meth, cocaine, crack cocaine, prostitution. It just got really bad. And I got clean and sober when I was 20. Then the food really took off. It's almost, I really think from a neuroscience perspective, those receptors were just blown out so hard by the crystal meth, the cocaine, the crack, that when I stopped using, then the amount of dopamine that those receptors needed just to get me back to a state of normalcy or functionality was so enormous that I started really binging quite intensely and viciously and needing food all day long to top me up and get me through. And it was a crutch. It just became everything. And my weight climbed up really rapidly. And there I was, 20 years old, kind of a bright, shiny star in terms of drug and alcohol recovery, going to community college, transferred to UC Berkeley, got straight A's, was using food to write my papers, fueling with sugar, flour, and caffeine to get through. And then my weight just ballooned up and up and up. And before I knew it, I was living with obesity and I was doing everything I could to lose the weight. I went to 12-step food programs. I didn't get enough clarity. I didn't get bright lines. I didn't know what abstinence was. Alcohol is so straightforward. You put the plug in the jug. And with food, I didn't know what was the plug, what was the jug. It was so hard with food. You can't stop eating. So the analogy just didn't work that well. My life got better though, because I was working the 12 steps. I was going to a lot of meetings and I started excelling in academia and I went on to get my PhD in brain and cognitive sciences. This was like 8 years after I'd been trying various forms of food recovery. I just couldn't make anything work for long. And then I finally got introduced to really, no sugar, no flour, weighted measured meals, a really clean food plan. And I did lose my excess weight. I still had one major relapse after that, gained back all my weight, had to lose it again. But then, by the age of like 29, the recovery really set in. And, at that point I was married. And I lived in Australia for a couple of years, did a postdoc. I became a tenured psychology professor. And I started doing a lot of service helping people lose their excess weight. And I started teaching this college course on the psychology of eating and the neuroscience of food addiction. And that is kind of what set the stage for me starting Bright Line Eating, was just my own lived experience and then years of trying to be of service, but discovering that the 12-step no sugar, no flour, weighed and measured meals approach wasn't attracting people. People weren't willing to do it. And I kept trying to help people with that form of the solution, and people weren't taking, they weren't biting. They weren't, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. They weren't drinking. And so when I resolved to write the book, Bright Line Eating, which came from a mandate in my morning meditation in 2014, I started growing an email list, and those people started asking me for help. And I sent them to 12-step food addiction programs. They wouldn't go, or they said they'd already been, they didn't want it in that form. And so I started a little online course, the Bright Line Eating Bootcamp. And that's where it really took off from there. There was, it turns out, a huge need and desire in the world for this type of solution, but in a different form, more scientific, not wrapped in 12-step packaging, and professionally led as opposed to peer led with sponsors and so forth. There just was need for a different form of it. So very reluctantly, kicking and screaming, I ended up starting that, because I never intended to start a business or charge anybody for anything. I was just trying to write a book, and it just turns out the world needed something different. So I ended up creating it.
So Bright Line Eating, why does it work so well? You're the neuroscientist. This is the part that I had never heard before.
Yeah. It does some things radically different. First of all, just already what I've said. No one's ever told you probably that you need bright lines for certain foods, right? They all try to say you can eat your favorite foods in moderation, right?
Susan, I used to go to Weight Watchers, and it was kind of helpful, except they sold candy bars in the lobby.
Right?
They were very small, so you have to eat 12 of them.
Or 47 if you're me. But yeah, no, totally.
It didn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't work for me. It sabotaged me every time I walk by.
Yeah, so that's the first thing. We tell the truth. For some people, moderation doesn't work. The word moderation is even interesting. Moderation depends on the two entities you're considering, right? The moderate amount of cyanide for a human being is 0. So you just got to consider, what kind of being am I, and what is the moderate amount of cookies for me? For me, it's 0. I don't do well with 1. I need 12, and then I feel like awful. So it's just, so that's the first thing, the bright lines. The second thing is, we understand that there is no way to win if you're waking up in the morning and trying to make food decisions all day long, because your willpower will get depleted, your emotions will get hijacked, and you will end up turning to food. The only way to succeed is to wire in your eating the way you wire in other habits, like the way you shower. You do certain things in a certain order in the shower, the way you brush your teeth. You brush your teeth. Now, not everybody does, I know, but the people who, most people, the preponderance of people succeed at brushing their teeth twice a day, whether they're sick, whether they're traveling, whether they feel like it, whether they're motivated, whether they're thinking about it or not thinking about it. It just happens. And that's the way we execute breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We plan it the night before, we write it down, and we develop these habits of eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner without any decisions being made in the process. And that kind of automaticity is something else you don't hear in the dieting world. Nobody's talking about automaticity still. I've been talking about it for 10 years. What's automatizable? How can you make it automatic? What interferes with automaticity? Exercising during, or starting an exercise regimen during a weight loss attempt interferes with the formation of automaticity. That's why it sabotages people's approaches, right? So I'm a fan of exercise. Oh my God, I exercise so much these days. Oh, I'm doing pull-ups. I feel like such a badass. But the reality is that if you try to start exercising when you change your food plan, you will not have enough bandwidth in your brain to build and wire in the habits to make them automatic. It'll unravel the whole attempt. So I teach people just really, really different things. We focus on different things in Bright Line Eating. We focus on habits, automaticity, being sensitive to willpower depletion. We focus on, we talk about emotional eating and cues and triggers, but really only so much as if emotions are what you're eating over, it's just another cue that you've got a response to, that you've been wired in, to behave to. And when you plan out your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then you have opportunities all day long to break those neural associations, to feel like, oh, okay, I want to eat, but I know it's not what I wrote down for breakfast or lunch today. And right now it's in between breakfast and lunch. So I've got to activate one of my other tools. I've got to activate my emergency action plan. I've got to make a call. I've got to pray. I've got to write. I've got to distract myself, get out of the kitchen. And you find ways to get from breakfast to lunch, lunch to dinner, dinner to bedtime without eating anything but what you committed. And then you feel so full of agency and amazement, and you start to build up your self-concept and your integrity. And what you realize is that is that your self-concept got so far damaged, really, by breaking your promises to yourself around food all these years.
And again.
Over and over.
You also taught me about that one sign that this has been happening is that you have boxes and boxes of clothes for different sizes that you go up and down through all the time. That is the story of my life.
Yeah, me too.
And it's so sad. And the first time I did Bright Line Eating, I had a significant weight loss. I felt so good about where I was. And I had put all these clothes in boxes. And in the past, hoping one day I could get back into these clothes, but it had been so long that I put these clothes on and they were totally out of style. And I had to admit, maybe these aren't my clothes anymore, even though they fit, but it was a nice milestone.
Yeah.
But then part of my healing has been to detach a little bit from this whole idea of like the perfect size, the perfect weight. And I love how your program, really supports us in that too, to be in a bright body, what that is for us, and to get off of, the torture of my life since I was 12 of like looking at my body, comparing it to others, finding fault in it, feeling ashamed, just having it so wrapped up in my identity and my self-esteem, and summers of depression when I had gotten heavy and thought I was worthless. And, when I was doing the boot camp, I had the opportunity to kind of gently go through doing your Bright Line Eating boot camp. It's a 8-week program with a sort of bonus couple of weeks at the end. I had a buddy, I had a mastermind. I started connecting and posting on the Facebook group and showing up, coming in and sitting all the way down, as you say. And I just had the opportunity for the first time in my life to really talk about this stuff. And I had tried the 12-step fellowships as well. And I saw a lot of good there. I just wasn't getting results ever. It never caused change to happen in me for whatever reason. I'm not knocking it. But there was something about this where I felt truly safe and free and without it didn't need to fit in the 12-step concept. It just needed to fit in the shared concept that we were having together. And I found out so many people had the same experience as me. So many people would break their lines and then come back from it, called a resume in your program, REZOOM, and come back from it. And they taught me, how do you come back from that? Like, that was crucial, because in everything I'd ever tried before, you mess up, like, well, now you might as well eat everything in the freezer, right? Because you've messed up. And so I finally learned like another way to look at that. And there was so much less shame and self-attack involved in it.
Yeah.
And I see that reflected in the other people I've met there.
Yeah. God, there's so much good stuff in what you just said. You might appreciate, Anna, hearing about another revolution that I'm going through right now in my thinking. We did really pull away from the idea of goal weight a long time ago and start talking about just the bright transformation and a bright body and a right-sized body, but right for you. Like, where do you feel at home in your own skin? And for a long time, I was talking about trying to help 1 million people have their bright transformation by 2030. And I let go of that recently. And some of the issue with it was I really didn't want people to have to look at their experience and decide, have I had my bright transformation? Am I at goal weight? Am I there? Because that's not really what it feels like, right? So I'm writing, I just actually finished the first draft of my fifth and probably final Bright Line Eating book called Maintain. And it's all about maintenance. And I've distilled the psychology of maintenance down to 3 deep identity shifts. It's really an inside psychological job. It's a deep psychological job to maintain weight loss long term. And the first identity shift that you have to experience is you have to become devoted to a plan, a program. a way of eating. And honestly, I don't care if that includes weight loss drugs as a tool to help rein in cravings and obsession, plus some sort of food plan, some sort of habits of, meditation, mindfulness, gratitude, whatever's in there, some sort of like inner work type stuff in the habit bucket, and some sort of support. Food, habits, support. Those are the 3 buckets. And whatever tools you need in your program, you're going to be devoted to it. So in other words, if you're using weight loss drugs, you're not going to go off them. You're devoted. Like, this is your program. You're not dieting. You're not on again, off again. You're devoted. It's the difference between someone who stops eating meat for Lent and someone who is vegetarian, right? The latter is devoted. The first one is just doing a one-off thing, right? Mm-hmm. So identity shift number 1, you've got to be devoted. Number 2, you've got to become resourced. You're not using food as a crutch. You're not using food to cope with every emotion, to get through life. You have other tools and a way of doing your inner work that leave you resourced. Maybe you would call it regulated, right? So you're resourced. And then the third is you're liberated, meaning you're not obsessed still with your food, your weight, tinkering with your food plan on and off the scale multiple times a day, like doing all what you were talking about, like looking at other people's bodies and weights and wondering if you measure up, and all. You're liberated from the food and the weight struggle, which means fundamentally facing the vacuum of all that energy and psychic time and space that you used to devote to your food and your weight, and filling it with other things, filling it with your life, your bright life. So devoted, resourced, liberated. Now the question is, can we get 1 million people living in maintenance? And maintenance means you're devoted, resourced, liberated. Your weight is relatively stable and you're done with it. You're devoted, resourced, and liberated. So whatever that means to you, and that may mean 40 pounds up from where you once were and thought that was going to be your forever weight, but your body said, no, thank you. It wants to be a little, have a little bit more resource on it, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Like whatever your place of ease is, devoted, resourced, liberated. And now I feel comfortable saying that's a transformation I can stand behind. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's connected to this positive feeling inside rather than, well, I'll tell you this. I had a couple people in my life when they're like, wow, you look amazing. What changed? And it'd be like, well, there's weight loss, but also my skin is brighter. My eyes are brighter. I have a lot of energy and presence now because I'm not like in a food fog.
Yeah.
And so they start noticing something and they ask, and then I tell them about bright line eating. And for some people, it seems, especially if they've had eating disorders, they say that's restriction. Restriction is bad. So can you talk about how your program handles that? I know people here on my YouTube channel will reflexively feel guarded about talking about, limiting what you eat.
I understand that. And the eating disorder recovery world really for a long, long time has modeled recovery from disordered eating after normal eating. Eating all foods in all ways in moderation, listening to your body cues, which I think is a wonderful state to be in if it works.
Yeah.
It doesn't tend to when addiction is on board. So addiction tends to escalate things and, develop tolerance. So you have a baseline of, a cookie every now and then, but then it leads to 2 or 3 cookies every now and then, leads to 2 or 3 cookies every day, leads to more than that. And it escalates, right? That's the nature of addiction. So the reality is that addiction is underlying disordered eating or eating disorders some of the time, not always. Mm-hmm. Sometimes healing can do the work of restoring someone to being able to follow their internal cues of hunger and satiety, and the mode of moderation and harm reduction that is taught in eating disorder circles will work for some people. But the eating disorder recovery community has a relatively low success rate. And I think in part because addiction is often, not always, but often underlying eating disorders. And when it is, an abstinence-based approach might be useful. An abstinence-based approach is a bright line approach, right? It might be useful. And again, I just want to just raise a couple questions, right? Like someone will often say, you can't eliminate all food groups. That's not healthy. To which I say, since when did sugar become a food group? In Bright Line Eating, we eat all whole real foods. Every last protein, dairy, vegetable, fruit, nut, grain, seed, legume, every whole real food we eat. And the quantities are large. We get more people writing in saying, I can't eat all this food than saying, I'm starving. Where's the rest of my meal plan? I just want to say that boundaries are not restrictions necessarily. They're boundaries. Like if I'm dating someone and I say, I don't want to have intercourse for a while, that's a boundary. And I don't think a restriction is necessarily a bad thing. If I use a tool because I know that my constitution is not good at certain things, like I can't draw straight lines very well. So if I just grab a ruler to do it and I use that tool because it gives me the results that I want, that's like my digital food scale. I don't tend to get the results I want when I just pile food on a plate and just eat until whenever. What I do is I create a brain that's always saying, can I have some more? 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 And the reality is when I weigh it and I weigh a big, ample amount, but then my brain knows I never eat beyond the amount I've weighed, it stops asking me for more. And the result is that I have peace. So it's counterintuitive. And I know that it flies in the face of what you get taught in eating disorder circles. And there is a big fat war and disagreement going on right now in the scientific literature with not a lot of data, frankly, on either side. I mean, the data for certain foods, like foods made out of sugar and ultra-processed foods being addictive, that data is really strong. What we don't have are a lot of data on treatment protocols. I mean, I have data showing that the Bright Line approach for weight loss works as well as weight loss drugs, and it works better than anything out there. And that's published. You can find those studies. We just published a 6-year follow-up study in Frontiers in Psychiatry, top journal. You can check that out. 6-year follow-up of an abstinence-based, approach, blah, blah, blah. Just Google that. You'll find it. But, it's the reality is that experts really disagree about these points, but everybody's journey is unique, and what works at one time point might not work forever. You got to stay in the conversation with yourself.
Everybody's different. And it's not a cookie cutter. I've become, well, I guess I always was. I'm an iconoclast. I always question what research tells me. I question, and I ask more questions. And part of how I learned about both trauma and like food and weight problems is when I learned about the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And you probably know about this, but I'll say it for everybody. It was back in the 90s. Vincent Felitti from Kaiser Permanente, Robert Anda from the Centers for Disease Control were studying a group of women who were morbidly obese and had been in a weight loss program at Kaiser, and they would have significant weight loss and then hit some wall that they couldn't understand and gain it back. Most of them would do so, and it's very familiar to people like you and me, and it is a mystery. It's like, why? And they did a comprehensive survey of, hundreds of variables. Like, what could it be? Did you ever take birth control pills? Do you eat raw eggs? Do you, did this happen? Did that happen? When they really try to do a great big study to go, what was the trigger that made it so that you have this weight and that it makes it difficult for you to change that, and other people just do it easily. And that's the question, isn't it, that Bright Line Eating answers, which I want to ask you about in a minute. But when I first saw that, they found that there wasn't much correlation for everybody. They had very different lives and backgrounds, but there was one thing that was quite common. In 80% of these women, they had been sexually abused as kids. And that just blew my mind. Now, this is the part that I'm iconoclastic about. They immediately assumed that then they're putting on extra weight because they didn't want people coming towards them in a sexual manner. They wanted to avoid that. And I thought to myself, I'm sure that's true in some cases, but I bet you it's not true in all cases. I bet many of them have very happy sex lives and, or would like to have one. And, that's quite an assumption that
Yeah.
everybody's just trying to like control how other people see them. I think that's easy to look at other people because you don't have what they have. You don't have the underlying food susceptibility. So you don't even know what it's like. And I, as a person with complex PTSD, that's a lot of how I discovered my own path to healing, was saying, did this modality of helping people with trauma, did the people who created it have what I have?
Right.
And not all of them did. And that doesn't mean they have nothing to offer, but it may not match what works for me. And the ultimate proof of whether it works for me is, does it work for me? Am I getting the results of feeling better, of functioning better, being able to have better relationships with people and fulfill what I'm capable of in my life?
Yeah.
And I first heard that concept from you when you were talking about food susceptibility and the other ways of managing your food. So many of us have a whole history of a dozen things we've tried: Atkins and South Beach diet and grapefruit and vodka. And, it's just like all my life, I've heard all these things. Smoking cigarettes was one for me, 2 packs a day for years.
Hypnotherapy, group therapy, individual therapy, 12-step meetings, Weight Watchers, Fit for Life, Body for Life.
Only eat on weekends. Don't eat on
Raquel Welch Total Beauty Program, the Susan Powter Stop the Insanity Program.
Yes.
So
there
many.
comes a day when you're just like, the honest fact is, like, none of this has worked. And you had posed the question, did the people who created that have what you have? And you had given me an opportunity with your quiz, which I want to share with everybody, on food susceptibility. Like, is this you? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So you're going to give people a link for the quiz on this
I
video?
will.
Yeah. So click the link, and then the first thing you're going to be asked is to think back to a time in your life when your eating was at its worst. Now, I don't mean a day. I mean like a stretch of time, a stretch of weeks or months when your eating was at its worst. Not how your eating is today necessarily, although maybe right now it's at its worst. And the reason for this is because once you've wired that way of eating up in your brain, those fiber tracks never go away, and you're always susceptible to falling back into those neural pathways very easily. So you're going to have to work a program that's strong enough to guard against that. So think back to a time in your eating when it was really, really bad, and then answer just a few short questions. And they're questions around, like, how bad were your cravings? How much was your obsession around what you'd eaten or not eaten? When you started eating, did you feel like you lost control over how much you ate? These are questions related to addiction.
Yeah.
And there's just 5 questions. It's super short. And then it spits out, actually, the algorithm's pretty complicated. It's not linear. It's logarithmic and exponential. So it does some fancy math. And then it spits out a number from 1 to 10. The higher you are, like 10s, like me, I'm what we call a 10 plus plus. Like if you've watched Spinal Tap, I go to 11, 11. Whatever. So those of us who are like 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s on this scale, we have a more addictive relationship with food. And then, the 9s and 10s would be full-blown food addicts. And then those who are lower on the scale don't have an addictive relationship with food. They may still have a weight problem, but they don't have a food addiction problem. And it's really important to understand the difference.
Yeah, and explains so much. Because I think I had this as a kid. It started early, and we grew up really poor. My mom was a drunk and an addict, and we didn't always have food. And I had to be strategic, like make friends with people where you can go to their house and they don't mind if you go raid the cupboards yourself. But I got very obsessed with sweets early on, and, kind of getting some food into my pockets. Remember this? They used to have this thing called Space Sticks. It was this thing in the 70s, very carby, sugary sticks that were like, they ate them on the moon. And so my friend's mom had a bunch of, like, they would have tons of those, and they'd have like a freezer full of chocolate chips or something. And I never thought of anything else. I would be over there like, I'll pretend that we're putting the puzzle together, and pretend I'm interested. But there was a part of my brain that was just like, is the kitchen empty? Will my friend go to the bathroom? Can I go stuff my pockets with Space Sticks? Yeah. And part of it was need.
I was like that.
It just developed like that. And for the first time, what your book and the boot camp helped me understand is like, not everybody has that. And there's nothing wrong with me. Like, I'm built like that for reasons that are not fully understood. Some people are, some are not. there's a key passage in the book where you talked about in animal studies, even rats, or some of them are born with this susceptibility that
Yeah.
they will eat themselves to death if given a chance. And, I'm not the only one who has done that. I lived, but that sometimes a lot of trauma and abandonment and things, I believe it was, or maybe I dreamed that.
No. Let me share what it is. Absolutely. So here's what the rat studies show.
Yeah.
In humans and in rats, 1/3 are addictable, 1/3 are moderately addictable, 1/3 are not addictable at all. And I mean, literally, in human beings, some people aren't addictable. Like, you could shoot them up with heroin every day and they wouldn't get addicted. And you might say, well, that's ridiculous, Dr. Thompson. Of course, if you shoot someone up with heroin every day, they're going to get addicted. Heroin is addictive, right? Mm-hmm. But I would say, no, not really. Like, they might develop tolerance. They might experience some withdrawal when you stop the injections. But if you sent them home with the syringes, they would never use them. Like, you send people home with pills after back surgery, you don't create just a society of addicts. Most people will use those pills responsibly, even if they develop some tolerance and have to withdraw a little bit when they stop using them. They'll get off them at the first opportunity. So with the rats, it's very easy to mate the addictable ones with the addictable ones, and then you get litters of baby addictable rats. And there's simple experiments you can run to show that they're addictable. I describe that in my book. It's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But what's interesting is when you mate non-addictable rats with non-addictable rats, you get litters of baby non-addictable rats. But then if you raise some of them with extreme trauma, some percentage of them, not all of them, will turn into addictable rats. Mm-hmm. So that's the evidence that early childhood experiences and trauma can, it looks like, have a factor in creating a baseline susceptibility to addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Through endocrine changes, I guess.
Probably. Yeah.
The whole nervous system is impacted.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, and that, when I read that, it helped me understand that's what I think was going on with the women in the study that started the whole ACEs program. Something happened to them that changed how their bodies understand food. Yeah. And deal with food and run their organs in such a way. And it's hard to, I hope we understand a lot more about that in the future. But when I shared that on my channel, we had so many people rush to join Bright Line Eating as well, because there's a lot we can't always know about ourselves, or, why am I like this? Why is it hard? But in my program with trauma, like, I'm not a therapist, so I'm like, I don't know why you have all the symptoms you have, but I know there's a common pattern. And I know there's practical strategies that help us calm those symptoms and be able to live a full life and become our full and real selves. And that's the great joy. And so that's always what I celebrated about Bright Line Eating. It's a place where you do that. So you have a master class that, if people are curious about this, they can go to that.
That's right.
Get more of the details about this and determine if this is for them.
That's right. All the neuroscience and more is in that masterclass. It's 2 hours. It's so much more life-changing and fulfilling than just sitting and watching a movie at night. So just go click on the link and you can watch the masterclass anytime. And we have a huge discount for you for our boot camp if you want to do that. After you invest the time to watch the masterclass, really absorb the science, you'll be in a position to discern, like, do I really want to give this a try, and think about being in the boot camp. But the masterclass is free. It's my gift to you. And, if you're not a book reader, you can read the book Bright Line Eating, but the masterclass has all the latest science in it as well.
Susan Peirce Thompson, thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to share this with everybody in the Crappy Childhood Fairy community. This is relevant to so many of us. It's something that I think a majority of us have struggled with. And I'm very pleased to share that there's a solution.
Thank you so much, Anna. I so appreciate your work in the world. Thanks for doing what you do.